First tonight, President-elect Donald Trump has continued to shock the political establishment in Washington by naming loyalists from the fringes of American politics to top jobs. Among the latest nominees is Robert Kennedy Jr., known for his skepticism about vaccines, who's been named by Mr. Trump as his health secretary. Robert Kennedy Jr. is a divisive choice and may face some opposition in Congress. But Mr. Trump said he would help make America healthy again. In a speech at his Mar-a-Lago resort, Mr. Trump praised Mr. Kennedy, saying nobody would be able to do things like him. Mr. Kennedy has repeated debunked ideas about vaccines causing childhood autism, and he's called for fluorides to be removed from water, saying he thinks it lowers children's IQ. Mr. Kennedy is part of one of America's most famous political dynasties and is seen as real Democratic Party royalty. His uncle John was assassinated while he was president, and his father Robert was assassinated whilst running to be the Democratic Party's nominee for president.
I want you to come up with things and ideas and what you've been talking about for a long time, and I think you're going to do some unbelievable thing. Nobody's going to be able to do it like you, and boy, does he feel it in his heart. So congratulations also to your family. And a woman who was a Democrat and was an independent, she went independent, and last week she said, I want to be a Republican because this is what I stand for. And I've always admired her. And I've admired her because she was loaded up with common sense. And it's all about common sense. I mean, we're conservative in this room, but we can understand the other side. But what we really are is people with common sense. And I think that's why we won with the numbers that we won by. Tulsi Gabbard. Thank you, Tulsi. Great common sense. And you have Vivek Ramaswamy. It's taken people a long time, and now that name is emblazoned into their brain. But Vivek, wherever you may be, where are you, Vivek? Thank you, Vivek. Good. He's working with Elon on efficiency. They're working on efficiency, among other things, and they're going to be saving a lot of money and making our country stronger and better. And they'll be coming out with individual reports, but a big one toward the end. And you put those two together, it's going to be really great. So we look forward to seeing it, working with Elon, and that'll be a great experience. You're going to learn something from Elon, I think, right? It's going to be great. Thank you very much, Vivek, and great job. We're going to get your energy bills in half, and that's going to bring down the cost, generally speaking. And we're going to have a whole new. We have a big announcement, and I won't tell you the name of his the exact name. I think he's an incredible person. Got an unbelievably.
Well, speaking at the same event, President-elect Trump also touched on some of his foreign policy priorities, including the conflicts in the Middle East, and he said that stopping the Russia-Ukraine war would be high on his agenda.
Fraud and inefficiency, and these two guys are going to find a lot of it. We're going to clean out the corrupt, broken, and failing bureaucracies, and that's what we're going to be doing. And we're going to stop child sexual mutilation. We're going to stop it because it's time. It's time. It's time, and it's not right what's going on. It is mutilation, and it's not going to happen. We have to stop it. We have to get back to a great country with low taxes and strong military. We're going to fix our military. We did it once. Now we're going to have to do it again. We didn't know a big chunk of it was going to be given to Afghanistan. We're going to work on Middle East, and we're going to work very hard on Russia and Ukraine. It's got to stop. Russia and Ukraine's got to stop. Thousands and thousands. I saw a report today. Thousands of people over the last 3 days were killed. Thousands and thousands of people were killed. They happen to be soldiers, but whether they're soldiers or they're people sitting in towns, we're going to work it. So I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I really want to congratulate Linda, you and Brooke for the job you've done. And it's an honor to be here. And thank you, Sly. Thank you, everybody. Great honor. Thank
Donald Trump. Well, for more on this, let's cross live to Washington and speak to the military and political analyst, Doug Brooks. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Doug. Mr. Trump's nominee for Health Secretary, Robert Kennedy Jr., has courted controversy all his political career, with misinformation on vaccines, fluoride in the water supply, and even Wi-Fi. What's been the reaction in America to his nomination?
I'd have to say Trump had sort of insinuated that he would do this when he won the election, and now it's happening, and it's a little, I think there's surprise that he's being nominated for such a high post. I mean, there was some thought that he might get assigned to something at a lower level, but being put in the cabinet as the head of Health and Human Services, let's say that's pushing the envelope, and I think there's going to be some significant popular pushback on this, but he still may get approved by the Republican-controlled Senate.
Well, I'm going to come to that bit in a minute, but we heard from the American Public Health Association, who said that Mr. Kennedy is not trained in any health discipline, doesn't have the manifest skills to manage an organization as complex as the health department, and certainly doesn't have the temperament for it, and is therefore not trusted. Is that a view that is widely shared?
I would say it's widely shared, but keep in mind the people who really were the core of Trump's support were the sort of conspiracy-minded types, the ones who follow QAnon, the anti-vaccination people who are sure the government, the deep state as it is, were trying to undermine America and so on. So I think his core supporters will be there. But all the major health organizations and doctors and so on are basically saying this is crazy.
But, I mean, what do you think Mr. Kennedy would actually do at the Department of Health and Human Services? What impact would someone with Mr. Kennedy's views have on the lives of ordinary Americans? Is there much scope for him to effect change, in all honesty, or will he just create a lot of confusion?
I think he'll create a lot of damage and confusion, as you say. His anti-vaccination stand has already cost lives. He did in American Samoa, one of the American territories in the Pacific. He had a bit of a campaign to try and stop vaccinations, and he were blamed vaccinations for childhood deaths, which was not true, but the anti-vaccination campaign ultimately stopped something like 60% of the vaccinations and led to a measles outbreak that killed more than 80 people and caused more than 5,000 cases of measles. It was crazy. So we've seen it on a small scale. If he's taking this belief to the nation from essentially the government agency that's supposed to push vaccinations and childhood vaccinations, it could have really devastating effects. We could see polio and whooping cough and other diseases that we haven't seen for decades return to America, and that would be truly devastating.
Indeed, but his point, though, is about choice, isn't it? He says he doesn't want to stop anyone from having vaccines, for instance, but at the very least that people should have choice and more information, even though at one point he's alleged to have worked against people getting vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a specialist in this, but obviously there's the issue of herd immunity, that when you get enough people vaccinated, you're able to essentially control these diseases. But if the vaccination rates fall, then you start to see the spread. And we have seen in certain areas of the United States where vaccination rates have fallen because these diseases haven't been there, or because of the anti-vaccination movement, we have seen these diseases return. And it's scary. It really is something that could impact, the United States is supposed to be a first world country. We're supposed to have sorted these things out, but people like Kennedy and others have been pushing these myths and these conspiracy theories, and it's going to cost American lives.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to sort of bang on about it, but I mean, I'm wondering whether there is concern that he will effect policy change and really gum up the works, which will make it less likely that people will take vaccines? Or is it just that as health secretary, he has a pulpit from which many people will listen to him?
Well, public health is, I mean, essentially controlled from Health and Human Services. There are state level ones and community ones and so on. But if essentially the largest organization in charge of public health and Food and Drug Administration and things is essentially backs off from pushing vaccinations or says, they're optional or they could cause autism and these other myths, then yeah, it's going to be pretty devastating. And he does have control over, I mean, Health and Human Services has all sorts of organizations underneath it that ensure that we have clean food and that we have, that everything we do essentially is tested and safe. So yeah, having the head of it be somebody who's anti-vaccination and believes these myths and pushes these myths is going to be a problem.
Well, I mean, it's not just vaccines, of course. I mean, there's plenty of other things that come under that department. And President-elect Trump said that Mr. Kennedy would help protect Americans from harmful pollutants, pesticides, food additives. I mean, no one can have a problem with that, can they? Or is there a sense that while his diagnosis may be correct, his therapy is all wrong?
So there's a lot of unproven, there's a lot of myths about, food additives and things like that. Or I guess you could argue, if you're being generous, that some of these additives or something, maybe they do cause cancer over time and we just haven't figured it out yet. So I guess if in a really generous sense, you can believe that. But it really hasn't been tested. And you do see differences, for example, between Europe and the United States as to which foods and which additives are banned. And so, maybe there's something there on a really small scale that he may have some positive impact. But I mean, just the larger issues of things he says and his willingness to believe conspiracy theories, that herbicides cause transgender and things like that. It's just absurd. And he is not a scientist. He is a lawyer. He's done environmental issues in the past, but his sort of putting essentially a conspiracy-laden lawyer in charge of the largest health organization in the United States is probably just a bad idea.
Well, I mean, he did make the point some time ago that you mentioned Europe and America in comparison. I mean, he mentioned some time ago that if you were going to cook, for example, McDonald's fries in the UK, there are only 3 additives. I mean, there's oil, there's the potato itself, and there's salt. That in America, that for some reason, there are 16 other additives to that. And he was wondering why. So, I mean, he seems particularly keen on ultra-processed foods. In other words, keen on dealing with it. So he said that he wants to get out of the school lunches a lot of processed foods and replace them with more nutritional foods. And the other one is he wants, as I said, fluoride out of the water supply, though the experts say it's perfectly safe in recommended amounts. I mean, what do you make of those kinds of things? What do Americans make of it?
Well, interestingly, Michelle Obama, back when Barack Obama was president, she had a whole health food campaign to get more healthy food into school lunches, for example. And they had a garden in the White House to sort of push this idea that fresh vegetables are better for you and so on. So this has been done in the past, although that was highly criticized by the Republicans back then. Now they have Robert Kennedy, and so they're bringing this idea back that maybe we need to get some of these things out of the food chain. But it's also interesting because the social media sort of exploded with a lot of myths about how many chemicals there are in these and the difference between McDonald's here, Canada, and Europe, and so on, which may or may not exist, but they're certainly being getting a lot of time on TV, and so people are sort of like being confused. I think there's a whole lot of chaff in the air that makes it harder to figure out if there's something to this or not. I think that we do have science, we do have people who test these things, and we do figure out sometimes that things are bad for us or they aren't. And that's, I think we have better trained people to do it than kind of a crackpot environmental lawyer. So.
And you mentioned earlier, Doug, that this is a nomination for just a nomination. I mean, he's got to be approved by the Senate. Do you sense any major opposition in that Senate to his nomination, where they're possibly likely to test some of his theories?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the Senate has been a little bit more isolated or protected, let's say, from the sort of MAGA movement that elected Trump. But the feeling among the sort of the Trump supporting Republicans is if they can have 53 or 54 Senate seats, and it looks like they'll have that, they'll be able to push through pretty much anything that Trump asks. Now, some senators may not be supportive of Kennedy and some of the other nominations that have come up lately. But Trump's made it pretty clear that he has the ability to essentially get them de-elected in the next election, right? So there's a fair amount of fear that the Trump is going to go after these people if they dare to sort of challenge his nominations. So we'll see. I mean, there's been, as you know, or I think you've already discussed on the show in previous days, the pushback on the Secretary of Defense nomination and some of the others. And we'll have to see how the Senate responds. I think there's a lot of hardcore Trump supporters, and there's a lot of people that are supporting him simply because they're afraid they'll lose their seats if they don't. So we'll see what happens.
Well, let's turn briefly to Mr. Trump's likely foreign policy. And if I could get you to put on your hat as a political as well as a military analyst, I wonder what your take is on what is likely to be America's fluctuating foreign policy between administrations on Ukraine, for instance, and whether you are bracing for severe turbulence in that regard.
Okay, that's a really important question. So first of all, let's look the nominee for Secretary of State, of course, is Marco Rubio, and he may be essentially the most mainstream nomination that Trump has done so far. So I think most people are comfortable with that, or I mean, they kind of expect somebody like that. Now, what Trump has been saying in terms of his policies on Ukraine, for example, that he'd end the war in one day, and when he's been challenged on that, it's really kind of come out that he's basically saying that Ukraine's going to have to surrender the eastern part of Ukraine to Putin. It's not I mean, keep in mind that the Republicans and Democrats largely support Ukraine in this conflict with Russia. But Trump and and I guess his really hardcore supporters are anti-Ukraine, and they say Ukraine's corrupt and so on. So he's saying that he's going to end the war quickly. He hasn't said exactly how he's going to do it, but the sort of word you get down from various questions and so on, he's probably simply going to ask Ukraine or tell Ukraine that we're going to stop funding them and that they need to essentially settle with the status quo, which is basically Russia covering eastern Ukraine. Now, what would that mean for Ukraine's bid to be part of NATO and part of the European Union? That's not clear. But the Russians feel they're winning this, and they feel that the election of Trump essentially is giving them the upper hand in this. So they may demand more. They may demand, that Ukraine essentially be more of almost a vassal state to Russia. So we'll have to see. But in terms of other foreign policy, we have a lot of things at risk. International trade, of course, because Trump's has this odd belief that tariffs, that very high tariffs, will essentially not cost American consumers anything. He doesn't understand how tariffs work. And those sorts of tariffs would also create reciprocal tariffs coming from our trade partners. And so that could be problematic as well. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fear that Trump's foreign policy is going to cause a lot of problems, and it's going to be a long couple of years.
And before we let you go, what about Mr. Trump's approach to NATO? I mean, does it remain unpredictable in your assessment?
Yeah, NATO's a great question. So I think a couple of points here. The Democrats wisely passed some legislation before Trump won the election, which requires essentially a 2/3 vote by both houses of Congress for the U.S. to withdraw from NATO. So that won't happen. However, Trump has a lot of control over the military and what they're doing. Right now, the U.S. has been working with their NATO partners to build up bases in Poland and along essentially the front line countries to Russia, to really strengthen NATO and make sure that Russia does not invade NATO countries. So there's been a lot of construction, a lot of movement of troops, and building of bases and so on, to just make sure this doesn't happen. However, Trump, of course, has the ability to essentially start withdrawing troops, to really handicap the U.S. role in NATO, and leave it up to Europe to deal with Putin and Russia. So we'll have to see. Trump has been hostile to NATO in the past. Again, he doesn't quite understand how it works. He has a sort of assumption that NATO countries are supposed to pay the United States for their membership, which is not true. So, maybe somebody will explain it to it. Maybe Marco Rubio will be able to get through and give him a better idea of the value of NATO and how much it's done to essentially support Western values and international trade and so on. But there's no guarantees.
And one more question before we go. I know you've had quite a long run with us, but it's great to have you on and to have the benefit of the two hats that you wear, political and military. Of course, the guardrails of Mr. Trump's first term, who were the generals he picked who aligned more closely with the conventional approach towards Europe. I mean, they're all gone. And those due to run his foreign policy now are, as you said, ultra loyalists. Does it look like Mr. Trump getting his way with the world will be an easier run this time around?
It won't be easy. The Pentagon, the Department of Defense is humongous, and it's really large, and it's hard to change things quickly. Trump has, for example, this idea of setting up a commission of retired military people that support him, that would essentially recommend the promotions of the highest level generals. So he would essentially gain more influence over it. This is something that I think is roundly rejected by the military community, which really prides itself on its independence from the political side. However, it may happen because, again, Trump has won such a resounding victory in this last election. Nevertheless, changing policy in the Department of Defense takes time. It's just it's a very large bureaucratic organization. It's been set up to function a certain way, and trying to make it change quickly is not going to be easy. It doesn't matter who he appoints and how loyal they are. They still have a lot of laws and a lot of regulations they have to get around to try and make it do the radical changes that he suggested.
Doug, I want to thank you very much indeed, and thank you for just really giving us the benefit of your analysis, keeping us informed with what's going on in America where you are. Doug Brooks is a military and political analyst who was talking to me on the line there from Washington.